Strategic bombing is a military strategy used in a total war with the goal of defeating the enemy by destroying its morale or its economic ability to produce and transport materiel to the theaters of military operations, or both. It is a systematically organized and executed attack from the air which can utilize strategic bombers, long or medium-range missiles, or nuclear-armed fighter-bomber aircraft to attack targets deemed vital to the enemy's war-making capability. One of the aims of war is to demoralize the enemy, so that peace or surrender becomes preferable to continuing the conflict. Strategic bombing has been used to this end. The phrase terror bombing entered the English lexicon towards the end of World War II, and many strategic bombing campaigns and individual raids have been described as terror bombing by commentators and historians. Because the term has pejorative connotations, some, including the Allies of World War II, have preferred to use euphemisms such as will to resist and morale bombings. The theoretical distinction between tactical and strategic air warfare was developed between the two world wars. Some leading theorists of strategic air warfare during this period were the Italian Giulio Douhet, the Trenchard School in the United Kingdom, and General Billy Mitchell in the United States. These theorists were highly influential, both on the military justification for an independent air force, such as the Royal Air Force, and in influencing political thoughts on a future war, as exemplified by Stanley Baldwin's 1932 comment that the bomber will always get through. Enemy morale and terror bombing. One of the aims of war is to demoralize the enemy. Facing continual death and destruction may make the prospect of peace or surrender preferable. The proponents of strategic bombing between the world wars, such as General Douhet, expected that direct attacks upon an enemy country's cities by strategic bombers would lead to rapid collapse of civilian morale, so that political pressure to sue for peace would lead to a rapid conclusion. When such attacks were tried in the 1930s in the Spanish Civil War and the Second Sino-Japanese War, they were ineffective. Commentators observed the failures, and some air forces, such as the Luftwaffe, concentrated their efforts upon direct support of the troops. Terror bombing is an emotive term used for aerial attacks planned to weaken or break enemy morale. Use of the term to refer to aerial attacks implies the attacks are criminal according to the law of war, or if within the laws of war are nevertheless a moral crime. According to John Algeo in 50 Years Among the New Words, a Dictionary of Neologisms 1941-1991, the first recorded usage of terror bombing in a United States publication was in a Reader's Digest article dated June 1941, a finding confirmed by the Oxford English Dictionary. Aerial attacks described as terror bombing are often long-range strategic bombing raids, although attacks which result in the deaths of civilians may also be described as such, or if the attacks involve fighters strafing, they may be labeled terror attacks. Development of the term terror bombing. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and other high-ranking officials of the Third Reich frequently described attacks made on Germany by the Royal Air Force, RAF, and the United States Army Air Forces, USAF, during their strategic bombing campaigns as Terrorangriff, terror attacks. The Allied governments usually described their bombing of cities with other euphemisms such as area bombing, RAF, or precision bombing, USAF, and for most of World War II the Allied news media did the same. However, at a SHAEF press conference on February 16, 1945, 2 days after the bombing of Dresden, British Air Commodore Colin Mackay Grierson replied to a question by one of the journalists that the primary target of the bombing had been on communications to prevent the Germans from moving military supplies and to stop movement in all directions if possible. He then added in an offhand remark that the raid also helped destroy what is left of German morale. Howard Cowan, an Associated Press war correspondent, filed a story about the Dresden raid. The military press censor at SHAEF made a mistake and allowed the Cowan cable to go out, starting with Allied air bosses have made the long-awaited decision to adopt deliberate terror bombing of great German population centers as a ruthless expedient to hasten Hitler's doom. There were follow-up newspaper editorials on the issue, and a long-time opponent of strategic bombing, Richard Stokes, MP, asked questions in the House of Commons on March 6. The controversy stirred up by the Cowan News report reached the highest levels of the British government when on March 28, 1945 the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, sent a memo by telegram to General Ismay for the British Chiefs of Staff and the Chief of the Air Staff, in which he started with the sentence, "It seems to me that the moment has come when the question of bombing of German cities simply for the sake of increasing the terror, though under other pretexts, should be reviewed." Under pressure from the Chiefs of Staff and in response to the views expressed by Chief of the Air Staff Sir Charles Portal, and the head of Bomber Command, Arthur Bomber Harris, among others, Churchill withdrew his memo and issued a new one. This was completed on April 1, 1945, and started instead with the usual British euphemism for attacks on cities. "It seems to me that the moment has come when the question of the so-called area bombing of German cities should be reviewed from the point of view of our own interests." Many strategic bombing campaigns and individual raids of aerial warfare have been described as terror bombing by commentators and historians since the end of World War II, but because the term has pejorative connotations, others have denied that such bombing campaigns and raids are examples of terror bombing. Defensive measures. Defensive measures against air raids include attempting to shoot down attackers using fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft guns or surface-to-air missiles. The use of air raid shelters to protect the population. Air raid sirens. Employment of air raid wardens. Setting up organizations like the British ARP, air raid precautions. Blackouts, extinguishing all lights at night to make bombing less accurate. History and origins. World War I. Strategic bombing was used in World War I, though it was not understood in its present form. The first bombing of a city was on the night of 24–25 August 1914, when 8 bombs were dropped from a German airship onto the Belgian city of Antwerp. The first effective strategic bombing was pioneered by the Royal Naval Air Service, RNAs, in 1914. The mission was to attack the Zeppelin production lines and their sheds at Cologne and Dusseldorf. Led by Charles Rumney Sampson, the force of 4 aircraft inflicted minor damage on the sheds. The raid was repeated a month later with slightly more success. Within a year or so, specialized aircraft and dedicated bomber squadrons were in service on both sides. These were generally used for tactical bombing. The aim was that of directly harming enemy troops, strongpoints, or equipment, usually within a relatively small distance of the front line. Eventually, attention turned to the possibility of causing indirect harm to the enemy by systematically attacking vital rear area resources. The most well-known attacks were those done by Zeppelins over England through the course of the war. The first aerial bombardment of English civilians was on January 19, 1915, when 2 German Zeppelins dropped 24 50 kg, 110 pound, high-explosive bombs and ineffective 3 kg incendiaries on the eastern England towns of Great Yarmouth, Sheringham, Kings Lynn, and the surrounding villages. In all, 4 people were killed and 16 injured, and monetary damage was estimated at £7,740, about $36,000 at the time. German airships also bombed on other fronts, for example in January 1915 on Lipja in Latvia. In 1915 there were 19 more raids, in which 37 tons of bombs were dropped, killing 181 people and injuring 455. Raids continued in 1916. London was accidentally bombed in May, and in July the Kaiser allowed directed raids against urban centres. There were 23 airship raids in 1916, in which 125 tons of ordnance were dropped, killing 293 people and injuring 691. Gradually British air defences improved. In 1917 and 1918, there were only 11 Zeppelin raids against England, and the final raid occurred on August 5, 1918, which resulted in the death of K.K. Peter Strasser, commander of the German Naval Airship Department. By the end of the war, 51 raids had been undertaken, in which 5,806 bombs were dropped, killing 557 people and injuring 1,358. These raids caused only minor hampering of wartime production, by later standards. A much greater impact was the diversion of 12 aircraft squadrons, many guns, and over 10,000 men to air defenses. Initially the raids generated a wave of hysteria, partially caused by media. This revealed the tactic's potential as a weapon that was of use for propagandists on both sides. The late Zeppelin raids were complemented by the Gotha bomber, which was the first heavier-than-air bomber to be used for strategic bombing. The French army on June 15, 1915, attacked the German town of Karlsruhe, killing 29 civilians and wounding 58. Further raids followed until the armistice in 1918. In a raid in the afternoon of June 22, 1916, the pilots used outdated maps and bombed the location of the abandoned railway station, where a circus tent was placed, killing 120 persons, most of them children. The British also stepped up their strategic bombing campaign. In late 1915, the order was given for attacks on German industrial targets, and the 41st Wing was formed from units of the RNAs and Royal Flying Corps. The RNAs took to strategic bombing in a bigger way than the RFC, who were focused on supporting the infantry actions of the Western Front. At first the RNAs attacked the German submarines in their moorings and then steelworks, further in targeting the origin of the submarines themselves. In early 1918 they operated their round-the-clock bombing raid, with lighter bombers attacking the town of Trier by day and large HPO-400s attacking by night. The Independent Force, an expanded bombing group, and the first independent strategic bombing force, was created in April 1918. By the end of the war, the force had aircraft that could reach Berlin, but these were never used. Interbellum. Following the war, the concept of strategic bombing developed. The calculations which were performed on the number of dead to the weight of bombs dropped would have a profound effect on the attitudes of the British authorities and population in the interwar years, because as bombers became larger it was fully expected that deaths from aerial bombardment would approach those anticipated in the Cold War from the use of nuclear weapons. The fear of aerial attack on such a scale was one of the fundamental driving forces of British appeasement in the 1930s. These early developments of aerial warfare led to two distinct branches in the writings of air warfare theorists: tactical air warfare and strategic air warfare. Tactical air warfare was developed as part of a combined arms attack which would be developed to a significant degree by Germany, and which contributed much to the success of the Wehrmacht during the first 4 years, 1939–42, of World War II. The Luftwaffe became a major element of the German Blitzkrieg. Some leading theorists of strategic air warfare, namely strategic bombing during this period, were the Italian Giulio Douarhet, the Trenchard School in Great Britain, and General Billy Mitchell in the United States. These theorists thought that aerial bombardment of the enemy's homeland would be an important part of future wars. Not only would such attacks weaken the enemy by destroying important military infrastructure, they would also break the morale of the civilian population, forcing their government to capitulate. Although area bombing theorists acknowledged that measures could be taken to defend against bombers using fighter planes and anti-aircraft artillery, the maxim of the times remained: the bomber will always get through. These theorists for strategic bombing argued that it would be necessary to develop a fleet of strategic bombers during peacetime, both to deter any potential enemy, and also in the case of a war, to be able to deliver devastating attacks on the enemy industries and cities while suffering from relatively few friendly casualties before victory was achieved. In the period between the two world wars, military thinkers from several nations advocated strategic bombing as the logical and obvious way to employ aircraft. Domestic political considerations saw to it that the British worked harder on the concept than most. The British Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service of the Great War had been merged in 1918 to create a separate air force, which spent much of the following 2 decades fighting for survival in an environment of severe government spending constraints. In Italy, the air power prophet General Giulio Douarhet asserted the basic principle of strategic bombing was the offensive, and there was no defense against carpet bombing and poison gas attacks. Douarhet's apocalyptic predictions found fertile soil in France, Germany, and the United States, where excerpts from his book The Command of the Air, 1921, were published. These visions of cities laid waste by bombing also gripped the popular imagination and found expression in novels such as Douarhet's The War of 1930, and H. G. Wells's The Shape of Things to Come, 1933, filmed by Alexander Korda as Things to Come, 1936. Douwerhet's proposals were hugely influential amongst Air Force enthusiasts, arguing as they did that the bombing air arm was the most important, powerful, and invulnerable part of any military. He envisaged future wars as lasting a matter of a few weeks. While each opposing army and navy fought an inglorious holding campaign, the respective air forces would dismantle their enemy's country, and if one side did not rapidly surrender, both would be so weak after the first few days that the war would effectively cease. Fighter aircraft would be relegated to spotting patrols, but would be essentially powerless to resist the mighty bombers. In support of this theory, he argued for targeting of the civilian population as much as any military target, since a nation's morale was as important a resource as its weapons. Paradoxically, he suggested that this would actually reduce total casualties, since the time would soon come when, to put an end to horror and suffering, the people themselves, driven by the instinct of self-preservation, would rise up and demand an end to the war. As a result of Douwerhet's proposals, air forces allocated greater resources to their bomber squadrons than to their fighters, and the dashing young pilots promoted in propaganda of the time were invariably bomber pilots. Royal Air Force leaders, in particular Air Chief Marshal Hugh Trenchard, believed the key to retaining their independence from the senior services was to lay stress on what they saw as the unique ability of a modern air force to win wars by unaided strategic bombing. As the speed and altitude of bombers increased in proportion to fighter aircraft, the prevailing strategic understanding became the bomber will always get through. Although anti-aircraft guns and fighter aircraft had proved effective in the Great War, it was accepted there was little warring nations could do to prevent massive civilian casualties from strategic bombing. High civilian morale and retaliation in kind were seen as the only answers. A later generation would revisit this, as mutual assured destruction. During the interwar period, 1919–1939, the use of aerial bombing was developed as part of British colonial policy, with Hugh Trenchard as its leading proponent, Sir Charles Portal, Sir Arthur Harris, and Sidney Bufton. The Trenchard school theories were successfully put into action in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, where RAF bombers used high-explosive bombs, gas bombs, and strafing against guerrilla forces. The techniques of so-called air control included also target marking and locating, as well as formation flying. Arthur Harris, a young RAF squadron commander, later nicknamed Bomber, reported after a mission in 1924, "The Arab and Kurd now know what real bombing means, in casualties and damage. They know that within 45 minutes a full-sized village can be practically wiped out and a third of its inhabitants killed or injured." Despite such statements, in reality RAF forces took great care when striking at targets. RAF directives stressed, "In these attacks, endeavor should be made to spare the women and children as far as possible, and for this purpose a warning should be given, whenever practicable." It would be wrong even at this stage to think that air power was simply seen as a tool for rapid retribution. A statement clearly pointed out that the ability of aircraft to inflict punishment could be open to abuse. Their power to cover great distances at high speed, their instant readiness for action, their independence, within the detachment radius, of communications, their indifference to obstacles and the unlikelihood of casualties to air personnel combined to encourage their use offensively more often than the occasion warrants. In strikes over Yemen in over a 6-month period, 60 tons of bombs were dropped in over 1,200 hours of flying. By August 1928, total losses in ground fighting and air attack, on the Yemeni side, were 65 killed or wounded, 1 RAF pilot was killed and 1 airman wounded. Between the wars the RAF conducted 26 separate air operations within the Aden Protectorate. The majority were conducted in response to persistent banditry or to restore the government's authority. Excluding operations against Yemeni forces which had effectively ceased by 1934, a total of 12 deaths were attributed to air attacks conducted between 1919 and 1939. Bombing as a military strategy proved to be an effective and efficient way for the British to police their Middle East protectorates in the 1920s. Fewer men were required as compared to ground forces. Pre-war planners, on the whole, vastly overestimated the damage bombers could do, and underestimated the resilience of civilian populations. Jingoistic national pride played a major role, for example, at a time when Germany was still disarmed and France was Britain's only European rival. Trenchard boasted, "The French in a bombing duel would probably squeal before we did." At the time, the expectation was any new war would be brief and very savage. A British cabinet planning document in 1938 predicted that, if war with Germany broke out, 35% of British homes would be hit by bombs in the first 3 weeks. This type of expectation might justify the appeasement of Hitler in the late 1930s. During the Spanish Civil War, the bombing of Guernica by German aviators including the Condor Legion, under nationalist command, resulted in the near destruction of that Spanish town, and casualties estimated to be between 500 and 1,500 people. Though this figure was relatively small, aerial bombers and their weaponry were continually improving, already suggesting the devastation what was to come in the near future. Yet, during the Spanish Civil War, the bomber will always get through theory started to appear doubtful, as quoted by the U.S. attaché in 1937. The peacetime theory of the complete invulnerability of the modern type of bombardment airplane no longer holds. The increased speeds of both the bombardment and pursuit plane have worked in favor of the pursuit. The Flying Fortress died in Spain. Large-scale bombing of the civilian population, thought to be demoralizing to the enemy, seemed to have the opposite effect. Drive E. B. Strauss surmised, observers state that one of the most remarkable effects of the bombing of open towns in government Spain had been the welding together into a formidable fighting force of groups of political factions who were previously at each other's throats, to which Hitler's Luftwaffe, supporting the Spanish nationalists, generally agreed. World War II. The strategic bombing conducted in World War II was unlike anything the world had seen before. The campaigns conducted in Europe and Asia could involve thousands of aircraft dropping tens of thousands of tons of munitions over a single city. The practice of area bombardment came to prominence during World War II with the use of large numbers of unguided gravity bombs, often with a high proportion of incendiary bombs, to effect indiscriminate bombing of the target region either to destroy personnel and/or materiel, or as a means to demoralize the enemy. This, in high enough concentration, was capable of producing a firestorm effect. The high explosive bombs were often on timers and used to intimidate or kill firemen putting out the fires caused by the incendiaries. 329. Initially, this was effected by multiple aircraft, often returning to the target in waves. Nowadays, a large bomber or missile can be used to create the same effect on a small area, an airfield, for example, by releasing a relatively large number of smaller bombs. Strategic bombing campaigns were conducted in Europe and Asia. The Germans and Japanese made use of mostly twin-engined bombers with a payload generally less than 5,000 pounds, 2,300 kilograms, and never produced larger craft to any great extent. By comparison, the British and Americans, who started the war with predominantly similarly sized bombers, developed their strategic force based upon much larger four-engined bombers for their strategic campaigns. The payload carried by these planes ranged from 4,000 pounds, 1,800 kilograms, for the B-17 Flying Fortress on long-range missions, to 8,000 pounds, 3,600 kilograms, for the B-24 Liberator, 14,000 pounds, 6,400 kilograms, for the Avro Lancaster, and 20,000 pounds, 9,000 kilograms, B-29 Superfortress, with some specialized aircraft, such as the Special B Avro Lancaster carrying, 22,000 pounds, 10,000 kilograms, Grand Slam. During the first year of the war in Europe, strategic bombing was developed through trial and error. The Luftwaffe had been attacking both civilian and military targets from the very first day of the war, when Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. A strategic bombing campaign was launched by the Germans as a precursor to the invasion of the United Kingdom to force the RAF to engage the Luftwaffe and so be destroyed either on the ground or in the air. That tactic failed, and the RAF began bombing German cities on May 11, 1940. After the Battle of Britain, the Germans launched their nighttime blitz hoping to break British morale and to have the British be cowed into making peace. Initially, the Luftwaffe raids took place in daylight, then changed to night bombing attacks when losses became unsustainable. The RAF, initially espousing a precision bombing doctrine, also switched to night bombing, also due to excessive losses. Before the Rotterdam Blitz on May 14, 1940, the British restricted themselves to tactical bombing west of the Rhine and naval installations. The day after the Rotterdam Blitz, a new directive was issued to the RAF to attack targets in the Ruhr, including oil plants and other civilian industrial targets which aided the German war effort, such as blast furnaces that at night were self-illuminating. After the Butt Report, released in September 1941, proved the inadequacy of RAF bomber command training methods and equipment, the RAF adopted an area attack strategy, by which it hoped to detrimentally affect Germany's war production, her powers of resistance, by destroying resources and forcing Germany to divert resources from her front lines to defend her airspace, and her morale. The RAF dramatically improved its navigation so that on average its bombs hit closer to target. Accuracy never exceeded a 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, radius from point of aim in any case. The United States Army Air Forces adopted a policy of daylight precision bombing for greater accuracy as, for example, during the Schweinfurt raids. That doctrine, based on the erroneous supposition that bombers could adequately defend themselves against air attack, entailed much higher American losses until long-range fighter escorts, e.g. the Mustang, became available. Conditions in the European theater made it very difficult to achieve the accuracy that had been possible using the exceptional and top-secret Norden optical bomb sight in the clear skies over the desert bombing ranges of Nevada and California. Raids over Europe commonly took place in conditions of very poor visibility, with targets partly or wholly obscured by thick cloud, smokescreens, or smoke from fires started by previous raids. As a result, bomb loads were regularly dropped blind using dead reckoning methods little different from those used by the RAF night bombers. In addition, only the leading bomber in a formation actually utilized the Norden sight, the rest of the formation dropping their bombs only when they saw the lead aircraft's bomb load falling away. Since even a very tight bomber formation could cover a vast area, the scatter of bombs was likely to be considerable. Add to these difficulties the disruptive effects of increasingly accurate anti-aircraft fire and head-on attacks by fighter aircraft, and the theoretical accuracy of daylight bombing was often hard to achieve. Accuracy, described as pinpoint, never exceeded the best British average of about a 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, radius from point of aim in any case. Post-war, German engineers considered bombing of railways, trains, canals, and roads was more harmful to production than attacks on factories themselves, Sir Roy Fedden, in his report on a post-war British scientific intelligence mission, calling it fatal and saying it reduced aero engine production by 2/3, from a high of 5,000 to 7,000 a month. Strategic bombing was initially a way of taking the war into Europe while Allied ground forces were unable to do so. Between them, Allied air forces claimed to be able to bomb around the clock. In fact, few targets were ever hit by British and American forces the same day, the strategic isolation of Normandy on D-Day and the bombing of Dresden in February 1945, being exceptions rather than the rule. There were generally no coordinated plans for around-the-clock bombing of any target. In some cases, single missions have been considered to constitute strategic bombing. The British bombing of Peenemünde was such an event, as was the bombing of the Ruhr dams. The Peenemünde mission delayed Nazi Germany's V2 program enough that it did not become a major factor in the outcome of the war. Strategic bombing in Europe never reached the decisive completeness the American campaign against Japan achieved, helped in part by the fragility of Japanese housing, which was particularly vulnerable to firebombing through the use of incendiary bombs. The destruction of German infrastructure became apparent, but the Allied campaign against Germany only really succeeded when the Allies began targeting oil refineries and transportation in the last year of the war. At the same time, strategic bombing of Germany was used as a morale booster for the Allies in the period before the land war resumed in Western Europe in June 1944. In the Pacific theater, if the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service and the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service frequently used strategic bombing over large Chinese cities such as Shanghai, Guangzhou, Nanjing, and Chongqing, organized strategic bombing on a large scale by the Japanese seldom occurred. The Japanese military in most places advanced quickly enough that a strategic bombing campaign was unnecessary, and the Japanese aircraft industry was incapable of producing truly strategic bombers in any event. In those places where it was required, the smaller Japanese bombers, in comparison to British and American types, did not carry a bomb load sufficient to inflict the sort of damage regularly occurring at that point in the war in Europe, or later in Japan. The development of the B-29 gave the United States a bomber with sufficient range to reach the Japanese home islands from the safety of American bases in the Pacific or Western China. The capture of the Japanese island of Iwo Jima further enhanced the capabilities that the Americans possessed in their strategic bombing campaign. High explosive and incendiary bombs were used against Japan to devastating effect, with greater indiscriminate loss of life in the firebombing of Tokyo on March 9-10, 1945 than was caused either by the Dresden Mission, or the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Unlike the USAF's strategic bombing campaign in Europe, with its avowed, if unachievable, objective of precision bombing of strategic targets, the bombing of Japanese cities involved the deliberate targeting of residential zones from the outset. Bomb loads included very high proportions of incendiaries, with the intention of igniting the highly combustible wooden houses common in Japanese cities and thereby generating firestorms. The final development of strategic bombing in World War II was the use of nuclear weapons. On August 6 and 9, 1945, the United States conducted the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both cities were destroyed with enormous loss of life and psychological shock. Meanwhile, Th.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.